podcast on the Bleav Podcasting Network. Coming at you live Wednesday afternoon on both X and YouTube for those who are watching. Feel free to chime in if you care to. I'm here, Jeff Balke, Mike Stanton with me as always. And, it's been a very interesting couple of weeks for the Astros.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, just start there. It's been different.
Well, to start off with. We have to apologize to our viewers out there that we haven't been here in a couple weeks. There's
We
been
haven't.
some things going on. Sometimes life gets in the way of our
It
fun,
does. It
and
does.
we apologize for that. But here we are.
Yep.
It has been interesting time for the Astros. This is a team and this is a fan base that prior to last year had been spoiled.
Oh,
But things just always seem to fall the Astros way, especially in this run that they've been on for the better part of this last decade. Last year, got off to the horrendous start, turned it around in 3.5 weeks, which was absolutely incredible. I don't think anybody saw that coming, especially when had all the injuries, especially in your rotation.
right.
Losing 60% of your rotation in 2 days,
Right.
and they were still winning, and that's something people need to understand that was an aberration. That's not something that usually happens.
No.
This year, it's been a mixed bag. The pitching has been well above average. The offense has been suspect, which we knew it was going to be going into
Right.
this. And even at this time, they've kind of done a little bit of the same thing. Some of the starting pitching that they thought they were going to get back didn't. They did get Lance McCullers back. We'll get to Lance here in just a minute.
Yep.
But offensively, there was a lot of weight on Jose Altuve, on Yordan Alvarez, on Christian Walker, on Yainer Diaz, that, these guys were going to have to do some heavy lifting because,
He's not
there
greatest.
wasn't, and there just wasn't a whole lot in the rest of the lineup. Well, the rest of the lineup has actually done okay,
It
led
turns
by
out all
Jake Myers.
I was
Yeah.
going to say, turns out all they needed was Jake Myers.
But they're doing this above 500, still playing, quality baseball.
Yeah.
But they're doing it without Yordan. So, last year it was the rotation. This year it's the, one of the bigger bats in the American League. He's not there. We'll talk about Yordan here in a minute also. So it's been a trial and tribulation type season. Hopefully, folks, I'm not right, but I think I am. This is going to continue. This is just going to be this day-to-day struggle. Who's going to start? Who's going to be in the lineup? How many runs are they going to score? This is going to be a battle for the rest of this season.
I think you're right. And it's what's really been interesting to me is the fact that they have sort of clawed their way back to modesty when it comes to their offensive output. I think now they're about 14th in OPS in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
They need to be up closer to the top 10 in order to really do damage. But when you look at their division, and we've discussed this ad nauseum the last few years, I mean, the Angels and the A's are going nowhere. The Rangers cannot hit to save their lives. Of course, they fired their hitting coach, and obviously that's
that's going to work because that always works.
It always works. It never fails. Like, who was it the other day that fired their third base coach? I'm like, oh yeah, that should really do it.
Yeah, that's going to shake it up.
That should take care of all of it. And then, and then of course the Seattle, they can't hit either. They're better this year. They've got Cal Raleigh's having a tremendous season. JP Crawford's hitting well.
Yeah.
But they're still a great pitching team, but they're not great. And they've lost, I think, 5 of their last 10, something like that, or 6 of their last 10. So yeah, I mean, it's right for the pickings. They have to stay healthy. Speaking of that, we have to start to talk about Lance McCullers.
Yes.
It's a fascinating thing to me because I think we all wondered out loud. I know you and I certainly did.
Sure.
As to what was going to happen when he finally did return from injury after 2 years, not playing, numerous setbacks along the way. You can see my little Lance McCullers bobblehead if you're watching.
There it is.
With his rescue dogs. It's been fascinating to watch because he is starting to round into shape. Obviously, fumbled around a couple times there, and then we got some moron drunk idiot like
Yeah,
slagging his family online. But I mean, what one of the things that you saw really yesterday, in essentially 6 inning shutout, was he really had he looked like the Lance McCullers we'd seen before. He
sure.
had good command. He got into jams a couple of times because he does tend sometimes hang pitches because he throws a lot of breaking stuff. But he got himself out. He struck guys out when he needed to. He got hits that, the kind of hits that he needed to.
Yeah.
And we've seen that more and more from him as he's progressed. Never mind the fact that he's now throwing over 100 pitches.
So when he first came back off the IL, well, let's start prior to that. Let's start at the beginning of the season. He was
Yeah.
still, we weren't exactly sure when he was going to make it back.
Right.
The Astros, that's not something that's not information they like to throw out there.
Yeah, we'll talk
And
about that.
we'll get to that here again in a little bit. But my view was anything you get from Lance McCullers is a bonus. I mean,
agree.
just simply because he hadn't pitched in 2.5 years. All the setbacks, the surgeries, everything. You got to remember this dude still has not pitched a whole season in Major League Baseball.
Right.
Okay. And so I don't think you could hang your hat on the idea that he was going to be a dude. And when he did come back, you didn't know what you were going to get. Fastball is not quite what it once was, but the fastball's got nothing to do with Lance McCullers.
Right. Exactly.
He doesn't throw it. He doesn't throw it.
It's unimportant for him. He's a rarity in baseball.
Well, and the reason is because he, it's plenty hard enough to be effective. It's in the low, maybe get up to the 93, 94 range. But he doesn't really know where it's going. That's not a pitch that he has ever really been able to command. Right. What he can command is his breaking balls. That's how he attacks the hitters. That's not just his strike pitch.
And there breaks all over the place. Like his knuckle.
It's not consistent. It's not.
It goes all over.
Sometimes there's more horizontal break. Sometimes there's more vertical break.
Right.
I would love to say, Lance knows what he's doing. Every time he does that, he can do that. Because you remember when he got called up, that's something he talked. Oh, I can change the shape of my breaking ball.
Right.
Or my curveball. He actually called it the knuckle curve back then.
Yeah.
And okay, maybe some, but now he throws the slider and the curve.
Yeah.
They're not really that different.
No.
They're pretty close to the same speed. They're similar breaks. And so, I think the pitch track and everything like that you see, I think that's all done by computer.
Yeah.
But it still has to be a nightmare even for the computer to try and pick out exactly what he's throwing.
Oh, right. No, when it comes up on the screen and
yes,
says like
knuckle curve
or what. Yeah,
right.
I'm always see they're like sinker, 98 miles an hour. I'm like,
right.
Is it though, or is it a full seam fastball?
Right.
Like, we don't know.
So
yeah, I'm with you.
So, his first couple starts, I was still questioning whether he was healthy.
Oh, yeah.
Because, the first time out, I think he went 4 1/3, shut out, but there was some walks. And then you look at the pitch breakdown, and he threw more changeups than anything else. And you're like, that was interesting. Now, the next start, that was the bad one. That was the 1/3 of an inning, 7 earnings.
Right.
And, again, you didn't see him until the third start really go back to old Lance McCullers Jr., which is, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to spin the ball. That's how I'm going to get you out. I'm going to change things. I'll change speeds on it. I'll change shape, different pitches, whatever, because that's what always has made him successful. And, the changeup is something that he has developed. So that's, you look at what he did his last time out, not this start last night, the previous start before that. His knuckle curve was outstanding. He threw it over 40%. He got 10 swing and misses on it.
Yep.
It was a truly plus pitch. Yesterday, he only threw a few knuckle curves. He threw a lot of sliders.
Yep.
And that's just one of those situations that has that got to do with scouting report? Yeah, some. It probably has more to do with feel.
Right.
That he just wasn't feeling the knuckle curve, so he went to the slider. But this is who Lance McCullers is. And I've always been a little critical because he doesn't use his fastball. At this point, I don't care. I've gone to the dark side. If that's what you need to get dudes out, then you spin that sucker all you need to.
Right. And to your point too, as you mentioned, he's never thrown a full season. his longest outing of his career in terms of innings pitched was 2021 when he threw 162 and a third.
Mhm.
I mean, that's good.
That's good. That's good.
That's a respectable number for, for pitchers in today's game. But when you consider that before that, he had thrown no more than 128.
Right.
And actually most of his career he's thrown under 100.
Mhm.
That's you got to look at that and say, okay, well, clearly this is not a guy who we can expect to throw boatloads of innings this year. But if you get, like you said, 3/4 of Lance McCullers
Yeah.
at his best, that's fine. But it does bring up a question now with Wisniewski now out for the season and Blanco out for the season. You know, are they going to need to trade for a starter? I have thought about this a lot, and here's part of my perspective on this. I have believed since last year, really, that this was going to be a transitional year for the Astros.
Mhm.
I felt it because, quite frankly, this was the period between Alex Bregman, and Christian, and excuse me, Framber Valdez,
Yeah.
some of those players, Kyle Tucker, and whatever came next,
Right.
right? Um, and so that's why we're starting to see, Cam Smith playing all the time and Zach DeZenzo and Jacob Milton, which by the way could be your outfield of next year.
Mhm.
Um, when you look at those and you look at that and you say, okay, we're in this transitional year. I didn't necessarily think they were going to be great this year. I didn't necessarily think they were going to be in contention, particularly as good as the Dodgers and Yankees and some other teams are. Um, but it does beg so my question is, if you are going to trade for starting pitching, you better be really careful about the moves that you make. They don't have a deep farm system, although they seem to continuously pluck players out of it that
Yeah.
play at the major league level. But you can't go down there and dig, thinking, oh, we better get a starter in here, unless you can get a long-term starter, unless you get somebody that's under contract.
Yeah. Well, okay. To start off with, I'll say it's too early.
Yeah,
You know,
fair.
there. If you're gonna make if you needed to make a trade at this point in the season, things have really gone off the rails.
That's right.
Okay, and because we're basically 2 full months away from the trade deadline,
That's right.
and what does that mean? That means, well, that's like 10 starts, which means whoever you're going to bring in is
Yep.
10 starts more expensive. And actually, probably even more than that, just simply because the other team
That's funny.
knows that if you're trading right now, you
Right.
really, really need them. So, it's kind of a market that would lean towards that direction. So,
Yeah.
now saying that, I also think it's too early to figure out exactly who this Astros team is. Um, is this a team that is going to truly be in contention?
Oh, right.
And what are your expectations? I think that may be as important as anything else. I mean, do
Right.
you really think that if this team makes the playoffs, are they going to make a big run towards another World Series?
It's
Uh,
it's
and
a
and I
great point.
and I don't think we have. I don't think we have an answer yet, and that's why I keep saying it's too early.
Right.
Because the real question is, are you going to bring somebody in, and then what are you going to do with Fromber?
Well,
Are
and
you
and
going to
it's
let Fromber walk? Now, if you're a team that you feel
right.
like you're in contention, you're going to make the playoffs. And if you're pitching as well as they've been pitching, maybe you go, okay, you know what? We're going to still add to this team because we said for the longest time that's why they traded Kyle Tucker was you can't just keep letting these dudes walk out the
Right.
door
Yeah.
and not get anything in return.
Right.
So
And it does make
that's
a
it.
difficult
And
it does
Fromber's the
make it
last
difficult.
big one.
And you're right, and that puts them in a difficult position with Fromber because let's say the things were different. Hayden Wisniewski was healthy, Blanco was healthy.
Yeah,
Maybe you're close to getting Christian Javier back, which doesn't appear to be the case. You're certainly not close to getting Luis Garcia back. Um, but if you start looking at that and you were to say, okay, we got a couple of these guys back, we've got some pitchers in here that have been doing pretty well. Ryan Gusto's been pretty decent. We've got some of these young guys that can start. Then we could start thinking about, okay, maybe we can trade Fromber. Maybe we can move him and acquire some at the deadline. Now you probably can't if you're concerned at
yeah,
all about postseason play, and the
yeah.
Astros always are clearly.
Well, yes, unless there's some kind of coup in the front office, and we've seen this. The St. Louis Cardinals did it a couple times.
Mhm.
We've seen the Kansas City Royals do it.
Yes.
That teams that were truly in contention all of a sudden say, you know what, this is not a World Series championship team. Let's go ahead and kind of rebuild this thing.
And they were
Um,
smart to do that,
they were,
actually.
they were, and the Astros have to make that same decision. That if this truly is a World Series or bust mentality, then if you're let's say they're exactly where they are, they're in first place by a game or two. They're 5 games over 500 at the trade
Hmm.
deadline. But if you're a World Series or bust team, then you trade from her because
Ex-
you're just simply, this is not the way this team is put together.
right.
You just can't say, the couple things that the Astros have going for them. First, you already mentioned it, the weak division. Okay.
Yep.
Second is the weak league. The American
Right.
League is not a powerhouse league. All
You're
the
right.
powerhouse teams are in the National League. So you wouldn't have a big you know opponent
Yeah.
that until you actually got to the World Series. Not
That's
saying
right.
the Yankees aren't good, and we're
Hmm.
we're trying to keep everything in perspective here. Um, I don't think the Astros get there though. I
Oh, I
think
don't think
that
so
I
either.
think that this is not necessarily a World Series or bust team. I think this is a team make the playoffs and you never know what happens. And we've
I,
seen that even with this team.
look, if this were a World Series or bust team, they would not be playing Cam Smith every day in right field. If this were a World Series or bust team, they wouldn't be, basically stopgap filling the second base position
Mhm.
with Mauricio Dubon and whomever else, they can come up with. Um, I think this is a team that is still, like I said, it's a team in transition. I think they would be wise to, not necessarily be big sellers, but not necessarily big buyers either. If
Yes,
they
it
can make
needs
some
to be
transition,
strategic. It needs
yes,
to be
correct.
strategic. But the problem is where this team is. If you're going to bring, let's say, we started this conversation, with the question, do they
Yeah,
need to bring in another starter? And I say yes. Now, at what level? That's
right.
the question. Are you looking for a mid to back end rotation
Hmm.
guy that is going to give you innings, make sure he's going to take the ball, pitch to a 4 ERA, something like that?
Right.
Or are you looking for something bigger? See, I think the top of their rotation, pretty good right now. Hunter
Oh
Brown,
yeah,
wow.
I
Frombers,
know.
very good. So, I
And
think
they
you're
get,
looking at
and that's
a
assuming they
middle
get
of the
Arrighetti.
rotation.
Yeah,
That's
you
right.
get Arrighetti back, and he was
Well,
very good until he got his
yes.
hand freakishly hit.
And then
You
with the way Lance has been pitching, the
right,
only problem with Lance is you just don't know. You,
right,
you
and you
just
don't.
don't know when an issue may rear its ugly head again. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I think that these are questions that Dana Brown is definitely losing sleep over. That's kind of the nature of the job.
It is.
But unfortunately, I don't think we're to the point that he could make a move um, without without paying an extra high price. It's going to be a high price
Right.
anyways because no
Oh,
one
for
wants
sure.
to help the Astros. And then the second part is they're probably going to have to detract from their big league roster, and that's something you don't really want to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they have a few pieces that potentially could be moved, but nothing that's going to garner them a whole lot in return.
Right.
And that's one of the problems. I will say this, since I mentioned Cam Smith, I will say, hey, props to Jacob Melton for making his debut on
Congratulations.
Sunday.
Pretty good.
Got an infield single.
Infield knock.
Had
Hey, it's a
had to
rocket now. It's
had
a rocket.
had to go to review to get it clear. I happened to be at the game on Sunday. My wife and I went with a good friend of ours and her daughter, who is my goddaughter, and so we went on Princess Day, which was we've gone
Nice.
the last couple of years. Very fun day for the young ladies at Astros games. Not the most exciting game ever, but they did win, so we'll take it. And it was like you mentioned, Hunter Brown on the mound. Um, the outfield really interesting. I mean, it was Jose Altuve and
Hmm.
Jacob Melton center, Cam Smith in right. You still have Zach DeZenzo, who's just dealing with like a minor injury. If you project a couple years down the road, their outfield, I mean, obviously, right now, nobody's going to talk bad about Jake Myers because of how he's playing. They have their outfield rotation of the future
Yeah.
already.
Could
in
be.
Smith,
Could
in
be.
Smith and Melton. Melton has got the thing about Melton that's really interesting is the guy is a tremendously gifted defensive player.
Mhm.
Um, and they have those guys in place. So it is great that he got his chance, and it's great that they're. But I also think this is part of that whole argument of saying, does Jacob Melton warrant coming up and playing time if this weren't a team that was like, we got to get these guys experience, right? If this were a team that were really battling for, supremacy in the AL overall and a World Series berth, I'm not sure you have Cam Smith and Jacob Melton playing, or even maybe Zach DeZenzo playing regular minutes. I think those numbers go to the guys who've had experience. And
Well, but that's exactly where this team is. We
yeah,
knew going into the regular season, excuse me, what that we were going to see these guys, and
yeah,
these guys were going if they were going to be competitive. They being the Astros, if they were going to be competitive, they would need these guys to be at least league average, get some big
yeah.
hits, drive in a few runs because they were going to get a substantial number of at bats, and just simply because all you had to do is look at the roster. Somebody's got to play the outfield.
Hey,
So, and Jake has really been
oh man,
pretty impressive. I
very
mean,
impressive.
he's hit he always plays good defense,
Yeah.
but he's hit the ball well. He's gotten some big hits. And to tell you the truth, if it wasn't for the bottom third of this lineup,
Yes, a
I don't
hundred
know where this
percent.
team would be because the top half of the lineup really didn't do anything through the
No,
first 2 months, month and a
right.
half, 2 months.
Basically 6, 7, 8, 9. When you look at and Jeremy Pena, right?
Right.
But because he's been so good, but honestly, like Cam Smith, Zach DeZenzo, um, Jake Myers, some of these guys at the bottom line, Mauricio Dubon when he's playing,
Mhm.
they really have been a huge thing. I'm so the thing about Cam Smith that impresses me still, and saw this the other game is his plate awareness is really kind of
Yeah,
next level,
he's got pretty good discipline for his age,
considering
especially for his
how
age.
his age. Exactly, that's the thing. I mean, it's
And he's
not
a big dude.
he is a big dude,
A
and
lot of times big dudes, you look at, the crazy season, as
mhm,
good as Aaron Judge has been, it
ugh,
seems like he just keeps
ridiculous.
getting freaking better.
I know, just
There's
ridiculous.
still a huge amount of swing and miss in that
Yeah,
game. It's when he hit it, it stays hit.
right,
But a lot of times the big dudes, because the strikeouts, the strike zone is so big,
right,
they got to let it fly a little bit more. And
right.
yeah, it's impressive to see Cam with that kind of discipline at such a young age.
And just a couple of weeks ago, I think he was leading the American League in WAR at right field. Like either A, there aren't very many good right fielders in the American League, or B, Cam Smith's pretty good. Maybe it's a
That
mix of
can that
both.
can go both
It's a
ways.
mix of both. It's a
It's
little
just,
of both.
it's just whether you're a half full or half empty type person.
Exactly. All right. So one more thing, and this is something I wrote about this recently for the Houston Press, and I'm really curious to get your take on it. Um, with Jordan Alvarez's injury, and now the revelation that he does have a break. It's not just swelling.
Yeah,
Of course, we went through this last year with Kyle Tucker's leg.
for three
Um,
months.
for 3 months. And by the way, we should note this is the Astros are not alone in this. I mean, the Houston
No,
Texans are like locally, the Texans play it pretty damn close to the vest too. You've heard it this week during voluntary OTAs. It's like, oh, their quarterback has some general soreness in his shoulder. It's general
yeah,
soreness, right? Like a general soreness is that like major aptitude. I don't know what that is exactly,
right.
but a lot of teams are cagey, and I understand the competitive edge of this, right? I understand if you've got a guy that is hurt, maybe you don't want to broadcast that out because you might lose some competitive advantage either in a game or in a trade
Well,
scenario.
especially when you're talking about a contact sport. I mean, even in
Yes.
basketball,
Oh, for
which
sure.
isn't technically supposed to be a contact sport, but they're
But
still,
oh
banging
yeah.
into each other. Football, completely understand. It
Oh
really
yeah.
started with hockey. Hockey was
Oh
he
right.
has a lower body injury. Because you don't want anybody to be able to target it. Baseball, I don't really get why the deep dark national secrets. It's just one of those things, and the Astros organization really started this with Jeff Luhnow.
They
You know,
did.
Jeff
Luno
Luno
seems
had
to
a
come from the
very,
Patriot way.
very small circle of trust to go back to Meet
Yeah.
the Parents, and and they just simply didn't tell you anything flat out.
Right.
I mean, that's when I was doing a whole lot of games for
Yeah.
AT&T, Root, whoever it was at the time.
Yeah. Whoever they were.
Um, and it was, they didn't tell, anything. They didn't want anything leaked out.
Right.
And we did this, to tell you the truth, we did this a couple years ago with Bregman and his hamstring.
Oh,
He would
right.
tell us, oh, he's coming back next week. He's doing better. He's doing baseball activities. And then
Right.
3 or 4 weeks later, they're still saying the same
Right.
thing. The bad one was Kyle with Tucker.
That one's
I
unbelievable.
mean, that was, it's not broken. It's not broken. It's not broken. And then it took
Oh,
Kyle Tucker telling us
yeah.
that, yeah, there was a hairline fracture. There was a break. And I mean, the optics, and the same thing with Jordan here, but actually not the same thing,
Not
but
quite.
a similar situation as far as the optics. It's just ugly. It just does not paint a pretty picture of that transparency you're talking about. And with Jordan, we don't know when there was a break. Now, I Bleav that, because Jordan was telling us this also, that, he was getting better.
Hmm.
You know, I don't feel like that they were going to bring in minor league pitchers to get him some at bats so he didn't have to go on a rehab assignment
Right.
if his hand was still bothering. But does that mean that the fracture was new? The hairline fracture was something that just came up, or is that
Right.
something that's been there the whole time? Because you remember in spring training, he went down with a sore hand also.
Well, they said it was 60% healed, whatever the hell that means. I mean, I'm just, I think my thing about this is the question I asked in the story is how much do teams owe their fans and media transparency when it comes to injuries?
Yeah,
And obviously some, but not a boatload, probably. And I remember Dusty Baker and his famous HIPAA requirements, which is total BS,
you're right. Right.
obviously. But a good way for him to get out of having to talk about it. The thing that was interesting to me, and Chandler Rome brought this up in one of his stories he wrote about this, um, and he has been quite critical. Which, of course, he's a beat reporter, so
Sure.
of course he's going to be critical. But he brought up the fact that James Click, not long before he was fired, talked about how they brought Jake Myers back too quickly, and they really needed to review their return to play protocols within the organization.
Yeah.
And so you start thinking about that. And look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but you do start thinking about that and you think, okay, you look at Luis Garcia, who hasn't pitched in 2 years and is
Right.
still sitting. You look at Lance McCullers and the myriad number of setbacks he had over that period of time, and Christian Javier and whomever else. And you do start to think maybe this isn't a systemic issue. Maybe this is something that they need to address as an organization, not just as, oh, here, we'll tell you or not tell you.
Because the optics from the outside
Yeah.
looking in, the Astros have always felt, and I've said this many, many times, I've always felt like this team is usually very conservative when you talk about a guy coming back. You
Right.
and maybe that's more for the day-to-day player, a guy, has a slide and tweaks a knee.
Right.
Okay, well, we're going to give you, I'm good the next day. No, we're going to give you a few days off.
Sure.
Uh, I don't know how much of this really has to do with the organization. It's got a lot to do with the players. Now, the information that's put out there publicly, that's got a lot to do with the organization. But as
Hmm.
far as injuries and how the rehabs go and setbacks, I'm putting that more on the players than I
Hmm.
am on the organization, just simply because they have had success with players coming back. And you know, it's like we started off talking about firing a hitting coach. That's the low man on the totem pole.
Right.
You're picking on the guy at the bottom, and a lot of times the medical staff kind of is the same way, because you're at the whim of the player's body and
Right.
how fast he wants to how fast the body is going to heal. And a lot of times you also have to protect the player from himself, because they want to get back on the field
Well,
yesterday.
well, that's for sure. I mean, whenever you had injuries, I mean, was it the same thing where you just like, I'm fine. Or how did you handle that when you were as a
It
player?
Early in my career, I had a shoulder injury that costed me all but the first 3 weeks of the 1990 season. Now, the medical field was not nearly as advanced it was now.
Right.
MRIs were just becoming in vogue.
Amazing.
They had no idea, what a labrum. So I had a labrum issue,
Mm.
and they had no idea really what that meant and what kind, because it was at that time it was all about Tommy John and the elbow,
Yeah.
which they figured out now. The shoulder is a way more complex joint than the elbow is. And it's a lot of times it's harder to get it to heal right, to get back to throwing. Um, so yeah, I rehabbed it. Rehab didn't take
Mm.
surgery. Had arthroscopic surgery. Even back then, they felt like getting scoped was almost non-invasive at all, and rehabbed it after surgery with the idea that I was supposed to be back in 3 to 4 weeks.
Ooh.
Now a labrum issue is a 6 to 8 month
I was gonna say it's 6
surgery.
months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it didn't take again, shut me down. So I ended up missing most of the 1990 season. But I equate that to just the medical fields just weren't as advanced at that time
Right.
to realize exactly how complex the shoulder was. Thank goodness, and I was able to come back from it and have a long career. But uh, yeah, it's so the after the surgery, that was the real problem, because I pushed to get back on the field and I shouldn't have. And I had another setback or whatever. I won't even call it
Mhm.
setback, because I was still having basically the same issue that I was having, which
General
was
shoulder soreness.
right. Well, I actually was, my shoulder was subluxing, which means it was actually
Ooh.
every time I would throw the ball, my
Did it
shoulder
come
would
out?
slightly come out of it, would go right
Oh,
back in. Rotator cuff was all
that
was
can't feel
all
good.
inflamed. So, there was multiple things that were going on in there. But, at this point in time, we just didn't have the technology and the knowledge to put me on the shelf and rehab it correctly.
Right.
They do now. So
It's amazing. The medical technology today is absolutely astounding.
mm,
The stuff that they can do when you think about where we were, and like 1990, right? It's 30 years, 35 years ago.
yeah.
I mean, that's nothing in medical terms. When you think about going back 35 years from 1990 and zipping
Oh
back,
yeah.
back then when it was basically like leeches and bloodletting
Right.
practically, I
Right.
mean, the stuff that the like imaging technology, nanotechnology, and, genetics and all that stuff, it's remarkable. And so certainly players have much better options now than they've ever had before. I'm, yeah, but I'm very curious to see how this develops with Jordan. I'm very curious to see what because I think in for the Astros and the optics of it, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
there is no doubt a clock that is ticking now, right? And people are going to know. They're going to say, okay, here's when Jordan first went out. Here's when they
Right.
said Jordan had a break. Like there is a clock ticking, and
Sure.
people are paying attention now. Whereas before, the average fan probably is just like, oh, he's out, he'll be back, whatever.
Well,
But
I
but
mean, this day and age of information at our fingertips all the time. I
yep.
mean, you and I both remember
Mm.
back when you actually had to get the
The
newspaper and
next
open it
day,
up to get to see what the box score was. And now, on the handheld computers we
forget
have,
it.
that we can get, I mean, live updates as it's happening
Right.
instantaneously for free. I mean, you don't have to
Allison
pay for it.
Allison Footer gave me a quote years ago that was one of my favorite. The great baseball writer. She said to me, she said, news media cycle used to be 24 hours. Now it's 24 seconds.
That's right.
It's like, hey, 100% true.
Yeah.
100% true. All right, thanks everybody for joining us. Fortunately, not too much of a downer of an episode. Astros are
No, we were
winning.
good. Hey,
Pretty good.
yeah, that's right. They're 5
By
game,
the
and
way,
Lance McCullers Jr. looked great last night.
By the way, PNC Park is definitely a ballpark that is on my radar. That place
Oh,
looks
100%.
beautiful,
That play, yes, and the way they positioned it, especially if you get a
right
little
on
bit
the river.
higher, and downtown Pittsburgh as a backdrop, very
Yeah,
pretty. They did that stadium right. That's it.
yeah.
That's
That
a and hey, listen, you don't usually have a tough time getting tickets there either. So if you're ever in the
ah,
Pittsburgh area, Western PA,
I'm telling you, I'm very, very tempted to make a trip to Sacramento just to see
Just
the
to
A's,
yeah,
just to see the A's. Because
right.
watching that game on TV, I was like, "Is this real life?" Because it felt
I
like a
thought
spring
I
training game.
that's exact that, or it looked like a game back from like the 90s.
Well, same thing in Tampa Bay.
Just the lighting, just the
Right.
lighting. Yeah.
Same thing in Tampa Bay. I mean, the weird thing in Tampa Bay was the video was even a little pixelated and kind of
Right,
strange. I was like,
right. It was a little
"What in the
fuzzy.
hell?"
Yeah.
It's like, "Welcome to
Well,
Steinbrenner
I
Field."
told everyone, I told all of my cameramen, if keep me a little bit out of focus. I look much better when I'm a little bit out of focus.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it. We will be back next week to discuss more Astros. And so thanks again. We will not make it 4 weeks this time. I swear that's on me. And we will talk to you then. As always, go Astros.
Adios.